Greetings and welcome back. In our previous lecture, we created custom list and form views, and now we're going to actually get into creating a process where we can increment the day of our Tycoon game. And like we're doing with everything else, we're going to start out simple, and we're just going to begin by creating our button to go to the next day. So we're going to do that by coming here to our form that we've created. And I forgot to change this to form here, so I did do that. And then what we want to do is just come in here on our form, in the header of our form, so we can create a header inside our form using that tag, the header tag. We can put a button in here, so we create a button tag, button, and I'm going to put the name first, and we're going to say name next day, just like that. And then we're going to have a string, something that we actually want to display. So I'm going to say string equals next day. So this will actually show up in the button, the text in the button. And then finally we have to have the type so that the Odoo framework knows with what type of button we're using. So we say type equals object. And that just tells Odoo's framework that we want to call a method next day inside of the OdooTycoon.GameManager class. So we can go ahead and save this, Control S, and restart, and run it, and we'll see our button right there, next day. And let's create a new game. So we've got 5,000, there we go. And when I hit next day, we get an error. Well, why do we get an error? And you can see it's because it says OdooTycoon.GameManager has no attribute next day. Well, that's a little bit of a bad error message. It caught it, unlike the other message that had an internal server error. Odoo's framework caught this error and provided us a pretty friendly message. What this basically means is we don't have a method named next day. It says attribute, but it's really a method. So let's go ahead and add that method right now. Come back to PyCharm and go to our models, and we just need to tab here. And remember, in Python, indentation is very important. We've been following the template so far, so we haven't had to talk too much about Python syntax. But when we define methods and we create functions and everything, Python's interpreter is very specific about the indentation. So we just got to make sure we tab in here, and when we type def, this defines our class, and we're going to just say next day. And when I hit parentheses, it's going to fill in this self for us automatically. Again, this is just syntax that you'll learn as you learn more about Python. And we do have Python primers. I have a Python Idle Tycoon course, so there's lots of resources that'll help you learn more about this, and you're going to learn, obviously, in this course a lot about Python. So next, let's just put something in here so that we know this method got called. So I'm going to use a simple print statement, almost like a hello world. We can say hello world, this is the next day. Just like that. We just want something that we know that this method got called. And again, the indentation is important. Inside of this method we indent, just like inside of this class we indent, and it's always 4 spaces. And I just use the tab key. So this is going to print this out into the terminal for us. So let's go ahead and save and restart. Come up here. We'll refresh again. And I didn't really need to refresh there. If we don't change the view, we don't need to refresh. It's only when we change the view. Otherwise, we still have to restart the server, but we don't have to refresh. So I hit next day, and you don't see anything here, but if we come into our console down here, you can see that it is working, saying hello world, this is the next day. The neat thing is we're ever so close now to actually updating the day. Let's just get rid of this. We don't need that. It was just a test. And we can just say day equals day, and actually I need to say self self.day equals self.day plus 1. This would be saying we're taking self, the day, we're taking its own value of what it currently is, and we're adding 1 to it. And let's go ahead and Control S to save and do a restart. And we'll go ahead and hit next day. And now notice we went to 2. And if we hit next day again, we go to 3. And if we hit next day again, we go to 4. And so we've really created our first real interaction now with the models and the views. When we're hitting that button, it sends and calls this method next day. And when it sees self.day, it not only adds 1 to the model, which then, as you're probably aware of, is writing this value back into our database in Postgres, it's also informing the view that it needs to be updated. So there's a lot going on just in this one line of code. I want you to pause the video right now and see if you can figure out how to add or subtract something from cache. So right now we're adding 1 to the day, but let's just suppose that each day we have a business overhead expense of $100. I would like you to pause the video and write the code now to take $100 away each day from cache. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and did that. If you didn't, that's fine. Maybe you didn't have access to a computer to do it, or you're just watching this video on your phone or something. But hopefully you're going to practice this and come up with something similar to what I just wrote here. That would be one way to do it. Now, there's a shortcut here, and some of you that already know Python probably are already like screaming at me in your head saying, hey, there's an easier way. Instead of doing self.day equals self.day plus 1, you can say self.day plus equals 1. And this will take self.day, add to it 1, and put it back in the self day. And you can do the same thing here with a minus and this value here. So this is going to do the same thing as before. It's just a little shorter syntax, and you can use this instead. And actually, most developers would probably use this as opposed to the more explicit kind of syntax that I used previously. So let's go ahead and save and restart again. And just to verify that when we're doing this now, you can see it's taking 100 off, and as the day goes up. So everything's working as expected here. Now, there is one thing to consider before we end this lecture, is that this is actually not good code. We haven't been writing very much, and we're already getting into bad code. Well, and the reason is because of the way Odoo's framework interacts with the backend database. Postgres is our database that's holding this data, and in between our Python applications that we're creating in Odoo and this database is an ORM, an object relationship management layer that sits in between our code here in Python and the backend database. And so when we call this self.day plus equals 1, behind the scenes the framework is creating a SQL statement, an update statement that it sends to the Postgres to update day. Then it's going to come down here to self.cache, and it's going to create another update statement, a whole separate statement with a trip to the server, the Postgres server, that is going to take the $10 away from cache. Now, with this couple lines of code and our little tiny game, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. It does, however, matter greatly when you start making Odoo applications that work on hundreds of records and not even thousands or millions of records. Even Odoo's framework will degrade quickly if you use these kinds of statements in loops, or when you're updating more than a couple of records at a time. Because even updating a handful of records, 10 or 20 records, is going to take a second or two a lot of times in most configurations. So I'm going to show you this early on, that you don't want this syntax, and I'm going to say here, we'll use our comments, because comments are good for a lot of things. It's like, take code that you might want to use, but maybe, in case you're refactoring and you might need to fall back to old code, comment out the old code in case you might need it again. So we'll say this is the easy way, but 2 trips to server. And I'm going to be explicit that we're talking about the Postgres server. And instead, we want to use self.write. And I want to make sure I got the syntax. I usually copy and paste this stuff. So we're going to have a Python dictionary in here. And so we say day, and we want to set it to self.day +1. So this is going to write to the server the day value that we update. And then we want to do the same with cache, comma, cache, colon, self.cache -100. So these are commented out. These are equivalent to this one statement. But this statement is more efficient because it does it as 1 trip to the server. It's going to create an update statement that's going to say update day and send the proper SQL to update day. But it's also going to, at the same time, in that same update, oops, and it's not cast, it's cache -100. Now you can see why, well, with just 2 fields, not a big deal. But if most database applications and business applications are not just 1 or 2 fields. Usually you're talking a half a dozen or a dozen of them. And the ORM has overhead. If you were writing direct SQL statements into a backend, that it wouldn't be such a big deal to have an extra update. But these updates that we're doing right here are heavy. They're like some of the heaviest things that Odoo does is taking these Python simplified ways of working with models and running them through this ORM and into creating those back-end SQL statements. So this is far more preferable. We're always going to try and use this, and that's why I'm jumping into it right now. It's so tempting to use this method to just simply write this out like this, but it's incredibly poor if you're having any kind of serious database application, business application using Odoo. So we've done that. Let's just make sure that it works the same. This is basically simple refactoring. So this we are going to comment this and say this is the efficient way. And we'll save. And we'll restart. And we'll just verify that we didn't break anything. And we get the exact same result, but each time I'm clicking that, we're only going to the Postgres server 1 time instead of twice. And as I pointed out, most importantly, we're avoiding the overhead of the ORM twice. It's not just the write cost, but it's going through that ORM and parsing out everything to create the SQL statement that we're avoiding. So with that said, we're going to end this lecture, and in the next lecture, we're going to learn a little bit more about the framework, but more importantly, we're going to reinforce what we've learned, and we're going to introduce a little bit of more Python too as well. So see you in the next lecture.